So today we're looking at a few crazy combos from the Genestealer Cult Codex. Let's talk a bit about what these murderous adjutants can do in-game. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where today I thought we'd do a bit of a Know Your Enemy type video, talking about Genestealer Cults and some of the biggest hitting combos in the Codex, things that are quite likely to appear in competitive lists. The Codex certainly hasn't been making anywhere near as many waves or custodies or Tau recently. A lot of the units are at least fairly fragile, but through combinations of special rules can really hit the enemy army in unexpected places or just punch enormously hard when all the buffs align. Hopefully this will be at least somewhat useful both for people playing against Genestealer Cult and people playing with them. So first up, I think it'd be rude not to start with some of the rock stars of the Codex, the Purestrains Genestealers. They've generally been kind of underwhelming in the past, considering they're basically the name of the Codex, but the new incarnation is absolutely fearsome. They're 14 points per model. I think maybe the default loadout will be Twisted Helix unless you've got something better to go with, and that means in terms of raw stats, each one of them is going to be throwing out 4 attacks at strength 5, AP 3, damage 1, hitting on 2s with their great weapon skill, meaning that just on their base damage output like that, a block of 10 models will kill something like 22 dead guardsmen, 9 toughness 4 space marines, or 9 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle. They can't get many buffs due to being core, but the few that they can get, like psychic powers and things, are really brutal. Despite being buffed up to having a 4+ invul save, I still wouldn't say that they're a particularly tough unit. Obviously high AP things they're not really going to care about too much, but either mortal wounds or just volume fire of low strength shots, both of those are going to chew through them pretty quickly. You do pay a premium for their speed and damage. Perhaps the scariest thing about them is that they can get all that damage to bear quite so quickly. In Twisted Helix that gives them a 9-inch base move, plus a d6 advantage, plus their 2d6-inch charge which they can do after advancing, and it's 1 command points to auto-advance them 6 inches, which would give them a very healthy average 22-inch threat range when they're starting on the board. Easy enough to burst from cover and sweep all the way to a midfield objective or something in just 1 turn. In just about every Genestealer Cult list, I'd expect to see one big block of 10 of these with the They Came From Below upgrade, a 10-point proficient planning thing, which can basically guarantee them a first turn charge if the cult player happens to get first turn. What you do is you set a ambush marker up on the edge of the deployment zone. When they come in they get to move 9 inches immediately, unless the opponent screen them out with some infiltrators or something. And then you get to do the above combo for the movement, so you get 9 inches plus 22 inches, so an average 31-inch threat range on turn 1. Not bad when you're potentially chewing through an entire squad of Space Marines, and even more maybe if you cast psychic powers on them. Alternatively, if the opponent moves up close and there isn't a good place to drop them, if the cult player goes second then they can go back into reserve and just deep strike later. Feels like it's a bit of a no-lose combo on top of a very efficient squad for just 10 points. Basically if these things are on the board, they're going to be one of the highest priority targets out of anything. Next up we come to the triple pistol wielding Kelermorph. This guy's an 80 point per model gunslinger, goes in the elite slot, and I think he's usually going to be packing the Wormtooth rounds, the ones that give him some massively improved heavy shooting. He's generally going to be almost guaranteed to get his shots off on something good. If you're not charging, then he can deep strike 6 inches away from the enemy as he's only shooting. He can be very hard to screen, and he'd usually drop down with a supporting squad so he doesn't just immediately die. With his damage output, every single time he makes a hit he can get an extra shot against the enemy, and he has the choice between 6 pistol shots at strength 5 AP-1 damage 1, these can snipe characters and do mortals on 6s, or with the Wormtooth rounds he gets the choice of 3 heavy shots at 18 inches strength 6 AP-3 damage 3. With crossfire he can still be potentially hitting on 2s on that even if he moves. I think a very tempting upgrade for the Kelermorph will be the perfect ambush one if you're not using it elsewhere. That's 15 points to basically automatically treat one unit within 12 inches as crossfire exposed, so a +1 to hit, +1 to wound and ignores cover. Against hordes and screened characters you'd go for the regular shots, they kill around about 7 or 8 dead guardsmen in a round of shooting, or do about 5 wounds to a standard toughness 4 space marine character with a 3+ save, basically meaning he's odds on to just execute something like a librarian or a chaplain in a single round of fire. Those Wormtooth rounds are maybe the more general purpose one if you can't get shots on that sort of thing. The damage 3 makes them pretty excellent at dealing with any 3 wound infantry, things like Terminators, Custodies or Gravis Armor Space Marines. He kills an average of 3 Gravis models in a round of shooting unless they're transhuman, and with Exposed he also does some fairly decent damage to heavy vehicles as well. Something fairly standard that's toughness 7 or 8, he'll average 6 wounds against, not too bad for a character that's going to be able to hide behind your own troops. If he manages to fire twice in a game against some reasonable targets, I think you're going to be hard pressed not to make his points back. This all does come with a bit of a downside though. He is very fragile at 4 wounds with a 5+ invul save. He is likely to hide in squads though, and can move 6 inches after firing each turn, so potentially if the opponent's got slow movement, then he could potentially hide out of line of sight blocking terrain maybe. I guess it just depends with exactly how aggressive he's being. I'd also bear in mind that if you do kill him, he can shoot on death for 2 CP, and that could potentially do something very meaningful indeed if he managed to gun down a key character just before he charged, or kill a squad that was standing on an objective. Then it's going to be bad times for the opponent. Overall, he's really quite tricky to deal with. I basically advise some very careful screening around any of his ideal targets. He doesn't want to be left to fire against something like a high value buffing character or sorcerer or something, though he's also not the easiest to screen out either, with that very close drop range. Probably preferable to try and kill him in combat as well if you can. That way at least he'll be locked to using his standard pistol weapons, and he'll have to shoot them at the actual thing that was engaging him in melee as opposed to whatever he wants. Next up, I think that one of the most daunting things about playing against Genestealer Cults are the new ambush rules. They basically seem designed to make sure that you're always playing on the back foot against Genestealer Cults, and the table feels super enclosed and claustrophobic compared with normal. The blip markers are usually going to be a nuisance. You won't be able to tell exactly where their forces are until you've deployed, but you know that something will be on each blip. They're perhaps the biggest hassle on turn 1 though, as in your movement phase you won't be able to move within 9 inches of a blip for any reason, so it'll screen any fast movers out of the Genestealer Cult deployment zone, provided they haven't left any huge gaps. Can be pretty annoying for flyers or things that wanted to do a first turn charge. It can also be particularly brutal with allied firepower units, say things like Tyrannid Hive Guard hiding in a building. Having some guaranteed insurance that the enemy isn't going to get too close is pretty nasty. You can also create a dot blip marker with the they came from below thing as we mentioned earlier. That means that one of the blips could just potentially go back into the sky if the opponent doesn't want to reveal it, and potentially leave your most aggressive troops with nothing within range. That's only the start of the reserve shenanigans though, because Genestealer Cults get to deep strike all sorts of units at all kinds of ranges, and all of them better than normal. If they're attempting deep strike charges with things like those Purestrains or Acolytes, they'll typically be deep striking 8 inches away. With a charge reroll, that means that's going to be around a 2/3 chance of getting in with a command reroll, and the Cult of the Four-Armed Emperor and some custom cults also allow you to get those rerolls. You can improve the odds even further by dropping in range of an Acolyte Icon Ward to give you a much more reliable 7-inch charge, happening more often than not even before rerolls, though the Icon Ward does have to start on the board for that to work. Finally, you can get a 3d6-inch drop the lowest charge with a Trap Sprung, that's only 15 points, and provides some fairly good insurance for a big unit dropping in, one that maybe isn't in Icon Ward range. Otherwise, if you're shooting or doing actions and things, you can drop in just 6 inches away from the enemy. It means that it's going to be very hard to screen any Genestealer Cult shooting units if you want to throw them down somewhere, and this one's absolutely great for things like actions and objectives. It's going to be very hard to stop Genestealer Cult players getting things like retrieve Nachman data or engage on all fronts, particularly on turn 2 and 3. You could even pay for the absolute premium deployment of setting up 3 inches away. That's the lying in wait proficient planning, though it does cost 20 points. Still though, this could be pretty massive if you used it to steal an objective, or just get a whole load of demo charges and hand flamers in range. Finally, for reserve tricks, you can also use first turn strategic reserves as well. From every angle is 10 points, and it could be a good way to get an alpha strike with things like ridge runners or other shooting units. I feel like this one's a particularly good one for handing out crossfire and maybe exposed as well. Just in general, screening is going to be a lot harder. The table's going to be feeling a lot more claustrophobic than normal, and most Genestealer Cult units are going to come into very good effect on the first turn, though they are usually going to be susceptible to being hit back very hard. One of the other best damage dealers in the Codex are the Acolytes. Here's just a couple of build ideas, you could certainly do others. The first one's a hand flamer bomb. Hand flamers are 3 points more than the auto pistols, and will get you a whole load of strength 3 auto hits. Not usually the biggest threat, but can be a bit of a problem if you get crossfire exposed. Typically, I think you might want to drop 8 inches away from the enemy if you can. That way you could at least attempt a follow-up charge, as they're still going to be very good in combat as well. Or you could pay for lying in wait for that 3-inch deep strike one, that'd be an extra 20 points, and then upgrade one guy to a demo charge for some fairly generalist crossfire threat. The hand flamers are definitely going to be better against infantry. You'd roast 16 dead guardsmen, 4 or 5 space marines, or 7 wounds to a toughness 7 vehicle. The demo charge does really help out against the latter too. Even though you are paying a bit of a premium for this, I think it's quite powerful to be able to just engage and destroy units of this size that are outlying on the enemy army. Seems like it could be a really powerful move for certain objectives, say just casually killing and taking the opponent's home field objective when they might not have been expecting you to. Generally though, Acolytes melee is more efficient than their range if you can get them there. Here's just one idea for a mining weapons squad: 10 Acolytes with 4 rock drills in total, and then taking the Artemis 9 proficient planning for 15 points. That gives you +1 attack on the first fight of the game. I think all the mining weapons are usable, though I think that the drills are probably my favourite. Each one of the Acolytes with them usually gets 2 attacks, 3 with the Artemis knifing, and their AP-3 damage 1 attacks that auto wound when they hit, and also cause an extra 2 mortal wounds if you roll a 6 to hit. It just means that they're massively generalist weapons, almost as comfortable chewing through hordes of small infantry as they are against heavy tanks. I do quite like the way that they don't care about anything like -1 damage mechanics, though if anyone's got mortal wound protection, that will take the edge off a bit. Maybe the aim could be to drop them in with a Primus for reroll 1s to hit and wound, and then you're rocking up to the enemy with 12 rock drill attacks, 25 strength 5 AP-2 claw attacks, all rerolling 1s to hit and wound where relevant, and this one's absolutely apocalyptic damage output: 27 dead guardsmen, 10 dead 2 wound space marines, or 15 wounds to vehicles without invul saves. It is the sort of squad that's going to be very vulnerable to counter-attacks when you're on the board. Acolytes are only toughness 4 with a 5+ save. Anything like Auspex scan, overwatch, or just interrupting in combat is going to be really powerful against them if you do find yourself in a position to do that as they're trying to make their way into combat. There really are a whole load of fun things and sneaky tricks within the Codex, though here are just a few of my other favourites. They've got 2 big ways to make the enemy fight last, a really big deal for a fragile melee army like Cults. Mass Hypnosis is going to be probably the highest priority power. Not only does it make the enemy fight last, but it also combines that with -1 attack as well. So not only would the units be hitting after the Cult unit, but they won't be hitting back anywhere near as hard. You can also get fights last as well with just putting a crossfire marker on an enemy unit and then using a 1 CP stratagem. Kind of something that the Genestealer Cult does need to be able to access, to be honest, as even charging non-melee units could inflict a few very crucial casualties on the unit that was charging. Perhaps one of the best relics in the Codex is the Unwilling Orb. I think this is going to be found in the majority of competitive Cult lists, as it not only helps out with some of your best powers, but also gives you amazing psychic defense. It basically means that the bearer can deny 2 different psychic powers and at any range they want to, so it means that you're not going to be able to reliably do things like psychic actions, making those a much more risky pick if you're playing Cults. Never mind that, if you just have a really key psychic power that you need to get off each turn, then there's at least a reasonable chance it's going to get shot down. As well as that, it gives you a +1 to cast debuffs such as Mass Hypnosis, so it's pretty much an auto-include for a lot of Psykers. The Excavate proficient planning seems popular as well. That one's a 20-point upgrade that they can use to ruin a terrain piece in your own deployment zone, making it difficult ground and also losing light cover as well, so it can turn a really big asset in your own deployment zone into one that's going to be a bit more of a liability and could even slow your troops down. At least that one gets declared pre-game, so you can play around that and only put fast units in the terrain piece, say. Atalan Jackals are going to be a nuisance for the first couple of turns. They're very cheap units at less than 50 points. They can do a little bit of anti-light infantry damage, but their main threat is that they can do a 9-inch pre-game move before the game begins, potentially doing annoying nuisance charges right from turn 1, move blocking your most important units, or just jumping around to gain crossfire markers, get to objectives, or get in table quarters. They're even reasonably tough for the points cost as well, and I would expect to see them in most lists. Finally, the Alpha Bug himself, the Genestealer Cult Patriarch. He may just look like a big Genestealer, but for a character he can punch far above what you might expect. He's just as fast as the Genestealers, so could easily be charging a massive 22 inches in a turn if you pay for that stratagem. His melee is really quite brutal and generalist, lots of attacks with multi-damage that can re-roll the wound roll, and he can potentially make him into a really stacked character, things like the +1 damage trait on the Warlord traits table, Twisted Helix for extra strength, and maybe even upgrading him with the Biophagus upgrade that gives him the 5+ Feel No Pain and exploding 6s to hit. Between good wounds, a 4+ invul, and unquestioning loyalty if there's any cult nearby, he's going to be quite a nuisance to take out, and he can also be casting psychic powers like Mass Hypnosis all game long. Overall, there's just a massive amount to be aware of in the Genestealer Cult Codex. I certainly will be talking through the army list and exactly what the units can do if you're playing against them, and I'll particularly look at each of the proficient planning abilities as they're going to give a good hint as to what that unit's going to try and achieve. So I hope that's been at least somewhat helpful, both for Cult players and people who are going to be facing them down. Lots of fun and very nasty stuff in the Codex, though still certainly a challenge to play them with how fragile a lot of the units are. If you think there's anything else that should be on this list, please let me know down in the comments below. Always interested to hear a few more ideas. If you've enjoyed the video, feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where we'll certainly keep the regular videos coming. I tend to post new 40k stuff just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention the Auspex Tactics Patreon page, which can be found down in the video description. That page is what allows me to keep on making videos like this quite so regularly, and channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next for the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.